Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week. I'm Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
You want to hit us with your quote?
Oh, yes. The Kanban system never causes problems. It just reveals them, from Toyota Kata. And this is sort of on theme for the episode, but also just a little story. We had an order that I saw was sort of placed off to the side, and I was wondering, what
this was a customer order.
Yeah, in the shop. And I asked about, what's that order? And it's like, oh, we're just out of that part, but it's fine because we're painting it today. And so this quote came to mind because it only reveals problems if you're sort of taking them in as problems. So that was a problem. I sort of was like, oh yeah, it's fine. My response was that it wouldn't be fine if that was our stock, and so we couldn't run the CNC because it's like, oh, don't worry, it's coming today.
Right.
It's like, right, but we just lost 5 hours.
Yeah.
And so I think...
And as that problem scales, at your current scale, that's not really an issue.
Right, but 10 people idled because...
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of interesting. You only learn from these things, I feel like, if you're looking to learn in a funny way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of maybe key to this whole process.
Yeah. That's probably true.
It's very easy to just sort of get used to the crap.
I think we've sort of talked about this, about treating things as exceptional rather than an inherent flaw in your system. Right? It's like, oh, well, we had to reorder the stock because of this extenuating circumstance of the customer changing what they wanted.
Yeah.
But you could also say, okay, but what could we add to our process to make sure that things are very finalized? And obviously there are times when it's just like, hey, something major unexpected came up, which might point to problems in their development process, like a customer's development process, if they need to make last minute changes like that. But just in general, I just feel like so many things, you drop your scissors on the floor while cutting a piece of tape.
Yeah.
It's like, that just feels like, oh, I messed up. You're not taking it in as as an example, I guess, is a tape dispenser has an integrated cutter, right?
Right.
So you wouldn't drop it on the floor, but it's hard to see those things.
Yeah. I feel like that was kind of in the intro to Toyota Kata, which I didn't actually get any reading done this last week. That was sort of one of the points, was accepting that outside circumstances will always be changing and variable and random to some extent, and that this whole process is kind of about making people and systems adaptable and as efficient as possible within sort of becoming the eye within the storm, as it were.
Interesting.
That was, at least that was something I took away from it, that while we sort of, I think, often think about this as becoming rigid and nailing down a process, really the idea is to be not stagnant.
Interesting. And right. I actually, in part of that, in that book, they talked about, which, again, I feel like every time you feel like you have your head around something, they're except here's an example of doing the opposite of that intentionally. They're talking about poka-yoke setups, which are mistake proofing fixtures and stuff. And sometimes they don't do it because they want people to be doing their work attentively. So always
do this, except when you don't.
Except sometimes do the opposite.
Yeah.
But in that vein of this isn't about, here are the rules. This is about I don't know, pay attention kind of, and think critically, and
sort of like what we were talking about last week of dealing with entropy. I think that was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, that effectively, if you don't create a culture that constantly adapts, it will stagnate and in fact go in reverse.
Right. And then if you add to the picture the fact that the whole world is advancing around you, standing still is reversing. So you're reversing at double time.
Yeah, but it's just an interesting kind of mind flip to be like, we're not trying to nail this down for perpetuity. We are trying to nail it down to adapt to perfectly suit this exact moment, and it can change tomorrow.
And really, I think maybe it's trying to nail down a process that is continuously updating and improving. Yeah. And that way you don't have to worry about the world changing, I guess.
Yeah. Which is exciting. And then also there's some days where I'm just like, excuse me, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
Can we just do the thing for a minute?
What if we just do the thing they're paying us to do and ship it to them? And
yeah.
So I sort of have two themes today. One is a smaller theme. One is a bigger theme. The first is sort of optimizing for learning. And the second one is this, like, the struggle of staying energetically engaged and improving, and sort of like exactly what you're saying. Like, some days you're just like, what if we just do the work and I don't need all these extra projects. And so the first, I guess, like, I feel like I've noticed a shift in the shop for us, and I'd like to attribute the space to do this to sort of all the improvements we've made, but I don't know, of kind of doing things specifically to learn about them. For example, like taking jobs that are sort of outside of our comfort zone because it's something we've thought about maybe doing, and so it's like, well, we'll figure out all the difficulties, and like, this job isn't going to be super efficient, but it'll be interesting to know if that's a direction we can kind of move.
I feel like that's my whole life.
For you, that's kind of inherent to a large degree. But
no, I
totally I feel like we've talked about this even for you, is like theories on how automation would change the shop, and it's like, well, can you sort of almost simulate it by accepting something and understanding, I don't know, and seeing what works, what doesn't work. So like with that, like some of our sewing jigs, I feel like a lot of that was just based on the premise of like, let's see what happens, rather than like a conviction that it is a good direction. It's more like a decision that it's a worthwhile experiment. And I feel like it's been kind of fruitful as a reframing of most projects, like really not trying to go like, oh, here's a problem, let's solve the problem. It's like, here's a problem, what happens if we do this thing? Not saying like it will move in a positive direction, because often like the negative direction is also equally useful.
Knowing what the negative direction
not
is.
Not that. And so that's been really helpful. And I don't know how that works on a accounting front. Like, how do you price jobs that you're sort of losing money on? Because it is valuable to the organization and is way cheaper than making a bigger mistake. Right. Of like, oh, we need a 5-axis. It's like, okay, let's go quantify, right? Like, let's quantify what that would do for us. And let's take a job that should be done on a 5-axis and clock. I don't know. Like, I feel like maybe that's a bad example.
I don't know. And some of these things are like, would be great to quantify, but also some of it's just kind of like, maybe I'm being stupid here, but sometimes I'm kind of like in the camp of being like, well, the organization is surviving. As long as like we keep the organization relatively healthy, I'm not too terribly concerned about trying some random stuff and not knowing exactly how it quantifies compared to, condition A quantifies to condition B compared to condition B. But having all of that experience and knowledge is obviously valuable. So there's a part of me that's just kind of like, at this point in the business development at this scale, like, let's try some stuff. If we get to a situation where it's clearly bogging us down, like, we don't want to just get used to having a bunch of like junk in our system. But I guess I just personally don't feel the need to seriously quantify every one of those things right now. But again, maybe I'm being stupid now that I'm saying it out loud.
I don't think it's a stupidity thing. I mean, I think like everything has a cost, and the cost of doing that analysis is at least an hour. And generally after an hour of putting things into a spreadsheet, you're like, it really just points out the fact that it's very, very complicated and sort of self-referential.
Yeah.
And so you're like, man, that doesn't tell me necessarily an answer. It does give you a better, every time I've done it, I haven't regretted it, right?
Right.
Like doing financial projections, you're like, this is complicated. Oh, that's an assumption. Oh, there's another assumption. Wow, this is basically all assumptions.
This is a beautiful house of cards.
Yeah, but still you sort of see like, oh, this is what would happen if we did X, maybe.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. But anyway, like the other piece, I heard a nice, I forget what the description was and I forget where I heard it, but basically like the difference between like an infinite competitor and a finite competitor. And like
in business terms, like,
yeah, where like where a finite competitor is sort of like trying to beat their competition, and an infinite competitor is trying to sort of beat themselves. And so I think that sort of relates in that internally you can kind of go like, what would happen if we did X? Like, could we completely change how this process is done just for fun? I mean, sort of for fun, but like
to beat our own metric, sort of.
Yeah. Or just like, we just improved this a lot. Can we improve it a lot more?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, which keeps things interesting. And
it does. Yeah. We haven't set really any targets in our shop.
Yeah.
Hard targets. But I think we're approaching a point where we might be able to, like, as a group, be able to kind of tackle some of that stuff in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming.
Interesting.
As skills progress and as we are able to kind of like cover each other's workloads a little bit more. And I think we're within sight of starting to tackle some of these things in a more quantifiable manner of being like, okay, let's measure some setup times. Right now we know they're long. Let's set a target for see if we can get them down to this and start actually picking away at that.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be a fun project now that like it,
like now that other things are sort of stabilized a bit around
stabilized a bit. And also just now that it's a group thing and not just me, like it wasn't that I was kind of musing yesterday that like, even like 6 months ago, I probably did like 90% of the setups.
Okay.
And like this week, I don't think I've done any.
Wow.
And we've been doing a lot of like single parts and stuff.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it's wild. And it's cool it just has kind of happened. I mean, it's been purposeful. It's not like it just happened. But, you know, there hasn't been a lot of discrete like, okay, by next week, you're going to do the setups. It's just sort of been like comfort levels have grown. People have started to take things on.
Also, you've been focusing a good amount of energy, seemingly, on like, how do we
communicate setups? Yeah. No, it's a big thing for sure. But so now we're at this point where everybody can do a setup and then think now we can like all put our heads into the game,
right?
And be like, okay, so here's where this whole, you know, we're each going to notice different things and have different ideas about how to tackle it.
Yeah,
and it's interesting, kind of like boiling it down, like that's sort of our job. You know,
setups.
Yeah, that's basically
programming and setups. And then the machine does its job.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of other extraneous little things, but like that's sort of the make or break, I think, in our shop, for efficiency wise.
Yeah,
like obviously you can save time with better programming, but like
it's
all the most of the other processes are like very what's the word, like parallelizable.
Mm-hmm.
So you can like, even if they're slow, they can not affect the overall efficiency of the system too bad. And then like setups are the spot where it's like, nope, idle until you get this done.
Idle and a person is standing there.
Idle and busy.
Yeah.
paying on all fronts.
So that sort of like is a nice transition to the other kind of focus I had coming in, which is about the feeling of not sure how to articulate exactly. You sort of said like you were musing that 6 months ago you did 90% of the setups and now you do very few.
Yeah.
I think it's been hard for me. So I guess some context. I watched a lean tour of Seating Matters. The link is in the description. And it was just like I've seen a bunch of tours at her shop. None of the content, maybe some of the content was new, but basically, nothing was new in the improvements, but I found myself sort of getting re-excited about doing more improvements and kind of refocused on the idea of like production is secondary and improvements are the primary work we do every day. Of like, we build systems that make buckles. We don't build buckles. Like buckles are sort of a side effect. And it's sort of a nice thing to say. I would say if you just like actions speak louder than words, that triggered. Yeah, but also if you just look at like those companies talk about that.
Yeah.
Because I think you have to put a ton of emphasis on de-emphasizing production, because everyone's like knee-jerk sort of gut is just like, oh, we're paid to produce, like let's go produce. And so if you just look at their actions, like actions speak louder than words would suggest a 7-to-1 prioritization of production, right? Like you're spending an hour on improvements and 7 hours on production. Right. So like clearly
you sort of have to
it's not secondary.
Trick yourself into believing that it's important enough.
But their shop is, very, very clean and organized. And what I liked is in the video, Ryan was sort of talking about like, that is not the goal at all, having a clean shop. It is a nice side effect of being organized, of checking machines, like wiping off grease and then going like, where's this grease coming from? Or cleaning up dust and going like, oh, there's a hole in our, dust extraction system. Let's fix that. And
so, sorry, I actually haven't watched any of their tours. Yeah. They manufacture their own product in-house?
Yeah. Yeah. They make these chairs. Pretty complex. So they have a wood shop, they have metal fabrication, they have coating, they have upholstery. It's a lot of stuff. Anyway, so it's just like very reinvigorating, and I think it's easy to kind of lose steam. The other thing he said, which resonated, was like, you need to be very excited and passionate about this because all the benefits lie on the other side of a lot of hard work. And I like that framing because twofold. One, I think when you describe the benefits of lean that people have seen, the first question of any like semi-rational person is just like, well, why isn't everyone doing this? It's like, that's the reason, is because the benefits require like a longer time horizon and a lot of hard work.
Right. It's a similar question to like, why isn't everybody an Ironman triathlete?
I suppose so. Right.
Well, it's really hard and it takes years.
Right. Yeah. Basically the same. Yeah. And then once you get there, yes, you can run, bike, and swim faster than most people. So actually a solid analogy.
And you have a healthy taste for suffering.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's easy to take our wins and sort of forget about them because they become just baked into the shop.
Yeah. And it's like, what's that phrasing for when you like just adapt to your current state? It's like why people always want a bigger house and a nicer car and more stuff. It's like that, but kind of the like masochist version.
Yeah, it's like, yes, like for us, we've increased our throughput by over 500%, but we're simultaneously learning to see waste better and better. And so it's like, oh my God, like we are so wasteful. This could be so much better. We've spent a lot of time brainstorming about what could be improved and like different machines we could build that would improve those things. We could make our auto tumble blaster automatically unload and take a new batch of stuff. So then you wouldn't have to...
Right.
Like, and it's all simple. It's like simple to build. I know, like I have a decent design. We could definitely build it, but we don't have time to build it. And so it's frustrating. And so sometimes it's like, oh man, like what are we doing all this time?
Yeah.
Anyway.
You're making product.
Yeah, making product and actually having big wins that then just become background.
Yeah.
And then it is only in sort of reflecting on like, it's not even reflecting on how things felt, because they feel worse now because I'm more attuned to like all of the things that are slow and inefficient and bad process. And but if I just look at like numbers of what we can produce pretty easily in a day or a week, it's like we've made huge strides. And even the sewing, like we just finished this big sewing, well, it's not finished, but sort of started. But we finally got results from it where now that is our production method. Kind of interesting. We actually slowed down the sewing machine.
Classic.
And increased throughput.
Classic austere move.
Classic lean move. I remember early on, because I bought a Speedio, and I remember some people reading about them, like, you know, doing the research to buy it. A few people, like Pearson amongst them, was like, you don't need a fast machine. I was like, what? You do need a fast machine. Now, the fast machine,
you do take advantage of the
100%.
fastness.
I mean, yeah, it's if I had a 10-second tool change time, my approach would be
significantly
really
different.
problematic. Yeah. So it does have a place, but it is worth considering if it's important.
Yeah.
Like the second you can make a process, as you were saying, like parallelizable. Who cares how long it is, as long as it's not longer than the necessary throughput on that station.
Yeah, I mean, it does still cost something. I mean, especially if there's human labor involved.
Well, we de-involved the human labor in the process.
But like in the example of CAM programming, like right now our throughput is throttled by CAM programming.
Yeah.
But say it wasn't. If you still are occupying a person 100% of the time with CAM programming, you might not be throttling your throughput, but you're paying someone to do something that still could be done faster, and maybe they could be doing half their time on that and half their time on something else valuable, like improvements.
By doing what? Like a faster computer, or what's the... I'm not sure.
By making it more efficient.
Making it more efficient for the person is always good.
Yeah.
But as an example of like, do I need a fast computer? You only need a fast computer if you could get a really slow computer if you had 2 of them or 3 of them, and they might be way cheaper than one really fast one, and you just do some programming over here, and while that thing is like chewing, you switch, which of course would not be a good workflow for CAM. Yeah. Because you can't just switch tasks like that. But for machines it often is.
Yeah. I think it's important to de-emphasize speed, because it's our knee jerk to emphasize it. Yeah. Simultaneously, like, I think it's important to keep in mind that like space costs money. Yeah. Like distraction of tending 3 machines versus 1 costs money. Like it's good to de-emphasize it and not make it your sole focus. But I think it's also good. Like I have heard quite a few people be like, it just doesn't matter. And I kind of disagree about that.
Right. It just doesn't matter.
Until
sometimes.
Until it really matters. And then all of a sudden it matters again.
Yeah. I guess more just in that case, it doesn't actually matter. And the stitching, the stitches per minute is predicated on an operator standing in front of the machine while the cycle happens. Yeah. And we've made it so that they don't, that they load the machine, hit go, and walk away. And so now it can take up to 2 minutes, which is the time it takes to sort of get the next thing prepped. So we just slowed it way down, which is going to extend the life of the machine. Now we have a ton of speed now available to us, so the second we want to increase throughput, we just increase the stitches per minute. Right.
This is kind of a perfect example of tact versus cycle time.
Yes.
So you're balancing, I guess it's not technically tact, but you're balancing the different parts of the cycle to match.
Yeah, we had a couple listeners, I feel like, comment on the differences between tact and cycle time. And tact is the theoretical well, it's not theoretical. It is the interval. It's like your total production time divided by your demand.
Yeah, the definition. Takt time is the rate at which you need to complete a product in order to meet customer demand.
Yeah, and so that is divorced from like how fast do we need to run this station to keep up.
Yeah.
And not run out of stock.
Yeah.
It's like our takt time, because if you only run that station for an hour out of every 8-hour day, then your takt time is still, 8 times longer than you're treating it, sort of. Right? It's like throughout the day, because the goal would be like slow everything down, slow your production down, and just get production leveling across all the hours of the day, instead of like, all right, now we're going to go in there and produce this thing.
Yeah.
Whereas cycle time is just, the time it takes to run one cycle.
Was there any other like specific nuggets that came out of listener? I didn't see the notes. So.
Oh, I just felt like there was some, not misunderstanding, but just like, I think it's hard to remember it often, because it is talked about on production lines in videos and like textbooks and stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like it's easy to walk away with the feeling that it has something to do with the total, how frequently the line produces an item.
Right.
But that is meant to be tied to how frequently the line needs to produce an item to keep up exactly with demand.
Which I feel like we need another word, because it seems like the two get conflated, understandably. We need another word for like total production duration, or like total production interval capability or something. That's like, because we often focus on, like, classic thing would be in CNC work focusing on cycle time in the machine, forgetting about loading time. So then you like start talking about like button to button, like green to green, and that's sort of like next phase in understanding the completion of the project, or the completion of the process. And then next phase is taking into account like, we have to include sawing and product, our material delivery in that. We also have to include tumbling and how long it takes to pack and stuff like that. So it's almost like we need another word that describes not just like meeting demand, but like what is our envelope of production per unit that we are capable of, if necessary. Or
interesting. Yeah, it's sort of lead time ish, but that's also muddled in with other other things. Anyway, so I think I've been trying to get psyched again about, like, I don't know, just refocusing on improvement rather than production. It is so easy to over time just slip back into like, I mean, even now I'm like quoting these bigger projects. Yeah. And the whole time you're quoting it, you're like, okay, how are we going to produce this many 100 parts per day? Wow, we really need to like make sure the machine is running this many hours. We need to get better at like stopping what we're doing on other stations to make sure the machine gets run. We need to figure out a daily schedule, like not pre-scheduled, but just every day we can put Kanban on the machine in a way that always keeps our longest run times into the night. Right, so we get like 4 hours extra runtime there. Like all these things that bring your focus squarely right back onto production. And then it's just hard to, when you arrive in the morning, go like, all right, what's on my list for like processes that need work? Or like, let me deep clean this corner that's getting really dusty. Yeah. It's just hard. He did say one other thing, which I think is always nice to hear, which is that they have one part-time person dealing with procurement, basically like inventory management
of their purchased goods,
like just in general, just making sure everyone has what they need, whether that's produced internally or externally. And he was saying for an organization their size, most companies would be at like 3 full-time people in an office. And so
that makes sense.
Side
note, have you read much about like the water strider position at Toyota?
I have not.
It's kind of curious.
Yeah, that's like the collector of Kanban and mover of parts. Is that right?
It's like, I think in a classic sort of scenario, they might fall under like the expediter category, but it's a little different. But yeah, they're basically, their job is to make sure everybody has what they need on the production floor. So that can be stock, it can be assembly components, can be whatever. But I think it's like it's an elevated position somewhat, and I think it's kind of like they have to have enough of a concept of the big picture to know where things need to be.
Interesting.
But I think their job is sort of like, as gaps inevitably form in the Kanban flow of product and cards and stuff, to like fill those gaps as they show up and maybe work on the process improvement. But like basically it's like making sure everybody has what they need. It's kind of a curious position that I'm obviously, like, we're not kind of at this scale to have a dedicated person, but I do, obviously find myself doing a lot of that kind of thing.
Yes, I was going to say that's like a small business owner.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of thinking more about, it feels like there's this forever quest for visibility into the process and how to make everything more obvious to everyone who's involved.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's just something I'm kind of like thinking about in the back of my head is really, how do you make that person unnecessary? But also, how do we kind of like make that part of the process more efficient right now?
I'm not sure I understand. Make the water strider position unnecessary?
Well, yeah, in a perfect world, like everything just flows and you don't need a person whose job is to like make sure everything flows.
Kind of. I guess I think it's in the, forget where this was, but I think it's in the same book. Toyota Kata, they were saying that they're describing the team structure and that they have these team leads whose job is really to focus on improvements, and that most companies don't have that position.
Yeah.
But that if you look at it on a total per person basis, production is way higher at Toyota anyway.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that position is sort of part of that adaptability and improvement. And so maybe you don't want it to go away. Maybe ideally you'd actually have like 50% of your team focused on that.
Sure.
I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like you could even say like that is sort of part of the like how much of your team is dedicated to process smoothness and improvement, and how many people on your team are focused on value add. Right. Now, I think it's also interesting because Toyota always talks about like their value add workers as being like their production line, and everyone else is sort of support staff for them. So I don't know how that plays in, because everyone else is non-value add, and so you're asking your customer to cover the cost of all those people doing whatever they do. I don't know.
It's a conundrum, like all the things, like everything, but curious to dive into it a little bit more.
Interesting.
I've sort of been thinking about how to create better, on the topic of setups, how to more effectively create visibility, like forward-looking visibility into what's going to be required for a setup. So that there's like, in theory, everything's online that someone can go look at, but they have to go and look at it. And so there's still a lot of in the morning, like, okay, we're going to have this come up this time of day. Let's get this prepped. We're going to have this come up this time of the day on that machine. Let's get this prepped. And it'd be cool to have some sort of system that was a lot more like, just very simply like, this machine's going to need these vices. Like, get the vices over there, or whatever the case may be.
I could imagine building that into the system of just like, even just a spatial, like if you have a queue of job tags that are arriving at the machine.
Yeah.
Like there might be a station that is for like prep of
Yeah.
like, which would be like classic SMED.
Yeah.
Like a big focus for a lot of companies is like before the line is idle, go get your tooling because
Yeah.
it takes you 15 minutes to retrieve it.
As we start to really like shift gears into moving to our new space,
Yeah.
I have a lot of ideas that are exciting that just have not been actionable in our current space
Interesting.
because they take up space. But
Yeah, like some of that layout stuff, it's like make it visually apparent where stuff is in the process. And it's like, well, I can't spread it out.
yeah, physically impossible.
Yeah. And like, obviously, if we thought about it hard enough, I'm sure there's a clever solution, but it's kind of like how much time and
Yeah.
physically laying out all your vices and tooling, like that requires another surface.
It does. Yeah, I think we're gonna have a staging rack at each machine where
For the next job?
For the
kinda?
next job,
Oh,
and
cool.
then so like any special tooling and work holding can go on that in prep, and probably stage stock as well. And then Quorum had this really good idea of like at each mill specifically, but I guess it could apply to the lathe as well. Have effectively like a tool storage rack that's just numbered 1 through 21 for our tools, for our tool changers, and that like you just pop everything into the appropriate number in that, so that it's pre-populated, and then as soon as the part ends, you just swap the ones that need a new number. As I'm saying this, probably we're going to need to have dual monitors at each machine as well, so we can have like current running.
Oh, interesting.
Visual
what's up next.
and then what's up next.
So-
easily accessible.
I'm sure you're totally aware of this, but in going from a small shop to a very, substantially larger shop.
Yeah.
In high school, we moved. We got a shop. I was like working in the garage for years, and then we got a shop. So it was like a 2-car garage that was so full of.
Wait, the high school got a shop, or you as a family got a shop?
My dad got a shop. And like the 2-car garage was so full of tools that I built things in the driveway, like a microcar and a boat, and I would just like tarp it every day, and then like whatever. And when we moved to the big shop, we were like, wow, so much space.
Right.
Great. We have an area for this. We have an area for that. And then like first day we're trying to build something. I think I was building a clamp rack.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, I need some screws. So I walked to get screws. A 5-minute walk round trip. Like, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes, whatever, a minute looking around, 2 minutes back.
Yeah.
And so we moved in the same kind of, with the same kind of thinking we had applied to our small space, which was definitely like categorized.
Right.
This goes, it did not work at all.
Yeah.
And so hearing you say that, like I would worry a little, and I'm sure you'll figure it out, but just worry a little about like, oh wow, we can have all these stations for like, and now all of your machines are an additional 10 feet apart, and now walking from machine to machine, which is maybe the primary thing you're doing.
Yeah.
It can start to get.
No, we kind of as a crew went over there to talk through layout to just we needed to have some idea where to put electricity.
Yeah, right.
And there was definitely like this is a lot of space, and we could fill it up in a really inefficient way very quickly.
Yeah.
So let's not do that. I think our current layout that we have, we haven't done it, but what we're thinking about doing uses about 50%, maybe 60% of the total space.
Interesting.
And I think, it is always a balancing act of like centralization versus decentralization, and like what needs to be where, what needs to be in one place. So we may have instead of like walking to each machine to stage stuff, I think we may end up doing like have a central tooling and work holding area that you like stage everything onto a tray and then just carry the tray to the machine.
Gotcha. Right.
And I think it's going to kind of flow from like stock gets cut and onto a tray, and then that tray moves to where the tooling and work holding is. So you kind of have like the stock stage for a job, then you can sort of add tooling and work holding and any other notes, and then kind of move things along.
It occurs to me that like I wonder if you could think about your shop as like a production line and draw it out with all these sub lines coming onto your main line. Because you almost have like this tooling assembly line.
Yeah.
That feeds each machine.
Yeah.
And then that also needs to get fed like at the right time with your stock.
Yep.
And with your program.
Yep.
And like they all kind of converge.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, the layout we kind of have right now is a parallel line, basically. Like machines along one side and then tooling, work holding, like deburr kind of area parallel to it, like across an aisle.
Huh.
With the stock with the saw at one end of the aisle, and then at the far end of the aisle, it'll like loop into a U into like tumbling and then cleaning.
So your material flow is fairly
straight,
linear.
Yeah, and then
interesting,
kind of like,
and having them all along a wall, you think like it seems like you're gonna be like, as an operator, you're just gonna be like walking a lot more than if it was like a tight cluster.
Yeah, so the other flow that you have to think about is waste. So
like the chips.
Yeah, so we thought that having a single aisle, for the moment anyway, of chip flow along the back of the machines made a lot of sense.
I think you might produce more chips than I do. Machining very little parts.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think eventually, also it's not that big of a space, but
yeah.
Yeah, we did kind of like, again, the cluster thing, you start to run into how big that cluster needs to actually be to accommodate the number of people and stuff that's working, like the parallelized, like the tooling, work holding, all that kind of stuff starts to take up more space, and then you end up with like a big cluster if you have that stuff at the center, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're working with a U format for the moment, which, like we were talking about a while back, like in a big shop, like I think this size shop would be a cell sort of on its own.
Yeah. Interesting.
We shall see.
Yeah, that's a deep topic. I'm sure there's a lot on it, and I haven't really read a lot about it, but
there is, although some of it's kind of, what I've come across so far is like there's not a lot of like, do it this way. There's a lot of like, consider these things.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's so variable based on like what you make and how big it is and where it needs to go next and what your batch size is and all that.
Yeah. Anywho, I got a little rambly. Sorry, everybody.
It's a puzzle. Nice. Well, that gets us probably wrap it up here.
Yep.
I'm excited to hear your improvements, but that is next episode.
Next episode, indeed.
Thanks all for listening. We have a Patreon. The link is in the description. We also have an Instagram. It is Incremental CI. You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com on the internet.
You can find me at lichen_MFG on Instagram and lichenprecision.com on the internet.
Till next time.
Talk to you soon.